The Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight, in quotations, has been shifted to become a boxing exhibition. And I think there's at least two reasons why this is being shifted to an exhibition. And one of those probably helps out Jake Paul, or at least saves him in a sense. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But I think one of the main reasons it's Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul is an exhibition rather than a licensed professional fight is because, even though this event is scheduled to take place in perhaps a slightly more permissive state of Texas, scheduled for July 20th, even then, the commission in Texas is actually the Texas Department of Labor and Regulation. So it's up to them to determine whether they can sanction a fight between two proposed professional fighters. Now, we have to respect the fact that the members of that board or that commission they are legally responsible. Once they sort of say, yes, we approve this fight to take place at this date at this venue under this promoter, they're somewhat on the hook legally. And so here's the thing that they look at when they're approving a fight between any two fighters. Of course, both fighters should be within a reasonable weight of each other according to what weights they fought at previously. But they're also definitely going to look at any past suspensions for each fighter. If a fighter gets stopped or knocked out, they're likely going to get suspended by that state from fighting again within either a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day time period, which is fair because this is done to protect the fighter. And typically, if you had a hard fight and got either knocked out or stopped, you probably don't want to fight in 30 days' time anyways, because you probably shouldn't even be sparring within that time period. So the commission has to sort of vet both fighters to make sure they're not already suspended or didn't get badly knocked out their previous fight, and look at when this proposed fight is scheduled. The other thing they have to do to ensure that both fighters are fairly matched is they have to look at both fighters' resume. Now here's what the problem is with Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. And this is where a lot of these MMA podcasters, former fighters, get it incorrect. So Joe Rogan, Chael Sonnen, and Michael Bisping are the ones I've caught just right off the bat. But these guys don't know how to evaluate Jake Paul's record on paper. Problem is, Jake Paul on paper is 9-1, and Mike Tyson is 50-6. So there's a huge disparity right there. I know Mike Tyson is 58. Mike Tyson is 58. Everybody seems to think that is automatically the disadvantage, but the licensing board, they have to look at both fighters' records. You can't match somebody with 100 fights versus someone who's making their pro debut. They cannot allow that. So for somebody who's 9-1 on paper versus somebody who's 50-6 with legitimate boxing fights, that's a disparity right there. But now let's take a look at Jake Paul's record several layers deeper. Okay, so he's really not 9-1 in my opinion. I think that 9-1 is a joke. He's really, at best, 2-1 because he's fought two licensed boxers in his last two fights, and then he's got that one loss versus Tommy Fury. Now, of those three fights, I really think that, in my opinion, only the one versus Tommy Fury is really legit, because Tommy Fury was coming to fight, and Tommy Fury, when he steps in the ring, he's trying to win. So I consider that a legit fight with a legit boxer. But let's look at these last 2 fights that Jake Paul had. One was versus a fellow named Andre August, whose record is 10-2-1. So Andre August has a winning record. And then Jake Paul's other fight was versus someone named Ryan Burland, whose record was 17-2-0. So both these gentlemen have winning records. However, you need to go one layer deeper and look at their records. How did they get those W's? So for example, Andre August, he's got 10 wins on his record. However, only one of those wins is versus an opponent with a winning record. All the rest are against, all the rest of Andre August's W's are versus opponents with losing records. For example, he beat a fellow who had a record of 6-25-3. So that's revealing right there. That what that tells me is that Andre August is being sort of prepped by somebody who's sort of feeding him these opponents so he can build up a winning record and then be farmed out, to use a kind term, to another aspiring fighter such as Jake Paul and command more money because he has a winning record. But we all know he's coming to lose, so because Jake Paul wants to pad his record with W's, but he wants people with a winning record, that makes that type of person sort of a valuable commodity. Okay, so then, just for the heck of it, let's take a look at Ryan Burland's record. He has 17 wins, but again, look at who he fought to get those wins. He's fighting guys with 20 losses. So for example, one fellow's 9 wins, 20 losses. Someone else, 12 wins, 20 losses. Another one, 13 wins, 20 losses. So again, Ryan Burland is being built up as a viable winning opponent. And again, it's all about the money. So, I think that this was just a smoke and mirrors maneuver on Jake Paul's part to make himself look like he fought legit professional boxers, and so he had somebody conjure up these two opponents for him, Andre August and Ryan Burland. All of this info is posted on BoxRec, so you're welcome to go verify it on that website. So my point is that when people say, "Oh, Jake Paul's got 10 fights, he's 9-1," no, look at who all those other fights were against. They were all versus, well, a YouTuber, a pro basketball player, and then 4 MMA fighters. I mean, some of them former MMA fighters. Of course, he fought Tyron Woodley twice, but I mean, those don't really count as professional boxing fights. So I can understand why the Texas Department would not want to sanction even a 4-round fight between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. There's just too much of an experience disparity. Even though Mike Tyson is 58, it doesn't matter. He still has 56 legit pro fights, and Jake Paul has arguably maybe 3. So it's, you can't, in good conscience, license that as a pro fight. Let's say their names weren't Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. You couldn't do it. You'd be leaving yourself too wide open for a serious lawsuit. God forbid anything should happen in the ring. Okay, so I think that's probably the chief driver behind why this is an exhibition and not a professional fight between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Now, let's look at a few of the other terms. Now, I have not been able to verify this through the Texas Department website. And once something is deemed an exhibition, I'm not sure that there's anything other than just negotiating between the two parties to determine the logistics of a fight. But two main points, I think, are the duration of the rounds and the rest period. So, for example, pro fights are always 3 minutes of fighting, 1 minute of rest for men all the time. For women, sometimes it's 2 minutes fighting, 1 minute rest. But for an exhibition, you could shift that. You could fight 2 minutes, rest 1 minute. You could fight 2 minutes, rest 2 minutes. I think, in fact, Manny Pacquiao is going to take on a former pro Muay Thai boxer in an exhibition, and what I've read is that they're going to have 2 minute rests between rounds. So regardless, I mean, Jake Paul and Mike Tyson could negotiate that, and my guess is they'd probably go, if they're going to change the timing, they'd probably go for 2 minutes on, 1 minute off. But who knows? Maybe Jake Paul wants to be, considered a legit boxer, so he wants 3 minutes on, 1 minute off. Regardless, that doesn't favor either person because they're both in there for the same amount of time. They both have exactly the same amount of time on the stool. So I don't think that favors either person. Where it could get interesting, however, is if they decide to use larger gloves, which it sounds as if they will. I've read that either it's going to be 20-ounce gloves or it's going to be 16-ounce gloves. Now, in the USA Boxing Masters division, which means for amateur boxers who are age 35 and up, I think they use 16 and maybe 20-ounce gloves. They use bigger gloves for these bouts. So just to break this down, because again, Michael Bisping got this incorrect when he referred to boxing glove sizes for pro boxing. Okay, so I'll break this down for you. Okay, so in amateur boxing, everybody from junior flyweight through welt up to, but not including welterweight, use a 10-ounce glove. So this is the size of a 10-ounce glove. I'll hold it next to my head so you can kind of see the scale. So somebody in my weight division in an amateur fight, we would use 10-ounce gloves. Welterweight through heavyweight would use 12-ounce gloves in an amateur fight. Now this 12-ounce glove that I use for sparring is not sanctioned for that. In fact, neither is this glove. The black one is a professional glove, and as you can see, there's not that much difference in the size between this 10-ounce and this 12-ounce. But you can imagine if this is what a 12-ounce looks like. Imagine how much bigger the 16 and the 20 would look. They're considerably bigger. Okay, so then in the professional ranks, everybody from junior fly through junior welter gets to wear an 8-ounce glove. So this is an actual fight glove, right? And you can kind of see there is a size difference between the 8s and the 10s. So a pro heavyweight fights in these 10-ounce gloves. Okay, so that's, this is, and I'm a 105-pound female fighter, so you can imagine the scale of this against a heavyweight male's head. My point here being, I don't have any 16s or 20s to demo that for you, but my point there is that you think about how big that glove is compared to the size of one's head. A 16 or 20, will afford Jake Paul a lot more just sort of protection. He doesn't even have to be that skilled. If he just puts his hands up like this, just the volume of those 16 or 20-ounce gloves will provide plenty of coverage. So I say the 16 and 20s are really, in a sense, not so much to Jake Paul's advantage, but they help him out. They help protect him against Mike Tyson's punches, because the power that Mike Tyson can generate is not going to change whether Mike Tyson is wearing 10-ounce gloves or 20-ounce gloves. That 10 ounces isn't going to change the power. What changes is the surface area that Jake Paul can protect himself with those bigger, puffier gloves, and the bigger gloves on Mike Tyson means Mike Tyson's power gets kind of dissipated, gets spread out over a larger area, because when he makes contact with Jake Paul's chin, that force is spread out over a larger area. It doesn't take away from the force, it just spreads it out. And you know, force divided by area is the pressure, right? So that's something that sort of, it doesn't really help Jake Paul, but it saves Jake Paul, if that makes any sense. Here's the other thing though. Mike Tyson for sure knows how to punch with his knuckles, because he's a world-class professional fighter. He knows how to punch through the glove, as they say, and land with these two knuckles. Now that's going to be, he may not be able to punch through per se a 16-20 ounce sparring glove, because that's what heavyweights use to spar. So Mike will be used to sparring with that size glove. But the only difference is sort of the impact that Jake Paul would feel should Mike Tyson make direct contact with his cranium. There'll be more padding there and between Mike's knuckles and Jake's skull. Now here's the other side of that. I can pretty much guarantee you Jake Paul does not know how to punch and land with just the first two knuckles right here, because this is something that just takes a long time to develop. And just try it for yourself right now. In order to get your first two knuckles to be the furthest point forward when you make a fist, you have to pronate your wrist. And if you do that without letting your elbow come way out, it's kind of painful, right? You should be able to feel it right in your forearm here somewhere. But this is not a natural position to move your hand into. Okay, so, and as you strike, you're pronating your wrist so that you can make contact with those first two knuckles. Trust me, Jake Paul has not spent enough time in the gym developing that. And he may be even somewhat ignorant of it. At best, he's probably hitting with sort of, this part of his knuckles. I dare say maybe a lot of times he's hitting with the bottom two knuckles and thinks he's, doing the right thing. But in any case, the 16 or 20 ounce gloves, whatever they are, that sort of helps Jake Paul out. It doesn't give him any advantage in terms of him trying to beat Mike Tyson, but it might protect him in terms of not taking as much hard damage from Mike Tyson's punches. Now, the one other question would be, since it's an exhibition, are they going to use headgear or not? And I'm going to guess that because Jake Paul is all about appearances, he's going to say no way. He doesn't want headgear. He wants everyone to see him and know it's him in the ring versus Mike Tyson. The headgear really obscures a person's face, and so it doesn't make for a good optics, doesn't make for a good visual. And I'm sure Mike Tyson could care less either way. He sparred as a teenager with no headgear. There's footage of that on YouTube. And of course, then he's had 56 professional fights with no headgear. So I don't think Mike Tyson cares either way. The main thing that headgear does in sparring is protect both fighters against getting cut in the headbutts, because it's It really hurts more than actually getting hit sometimes if you wind up clashing heads accidentally. Human skull is like, at least on this part, it's like rock. It's like running your own head into a rock if you accidentally clash heads as you're both coming forward with a punch. So I don't think the headgear's a factor at all. So we're still in April. We got May, June, 3 weeks in July before this exhibition match between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul takes place. How much are you willing to pay to watch this? Are you guys gonna watch Mike Tyson, Jake Paul? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you very much for listening.